Militant means vigorously active, combative and/or aggressive, especially in support of a cause. As in, militant reformers. It comes from the 15th century Latin, militare, meaning, to serve as a soldier. The related modern concept of the militia as a defensive organization against invaders grew out of the Anglo-Saxon FYRD. In times of crisis, the militiaman left his civilian duties and became a soldier until the emergency was over, when he returned to his civilian occupation. The current meaning of militant does not usually refer to a registered soldier. It can be anyone who subscribes to the idea of using vigorous, sometimes extreme, activity to achieve an objective, usually political. A militant activist would be expected to be more confrontational and aggressive than an activist not described as militant. Militants may or may not include physical violence, armed combat, terrorism, and the like. The Trotskyist militant group in the United Kingdom published a newspaper, was active in labor disputes, moved resolutions in political meetings, but was not based on violence. The purpose of the Christian Church militant is to struggle against sin, the devil and the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. But it is not a violent movement. Militant can mean vigorously active and aggressive, especially in support of a cause, as in militant reformers. The American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language defines militant as having a combative character, aggressive, especially in the service of a cause. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines militant as aggressively active. It says that the word militant might typically be used in phrases such as militant conservationists or a militant attitude. An example of the adjective usages is demonstrated when the New York Times ran an article titled, "Militant Environmentalists Planning Summer Protests to Save Redwoods," describing a group that believes in confrontational demonstrations and nonviolent tactics to get across their message of preserving the environment. Another usage example includes a militant political activist, drawing attention to behaviors typical of those engaged in intensive political activism. The political protests headed by the Reverend Al Sharpton have been described as militant in nature. In the Washington Post, the word militant is sometimes used to describe groups that do not name or describe themselves as militants, but that advocate extreme violence. In the early 21st century, members of groups involved in Islamic terrorism such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS are usually described as militants. A militant, as a noun, is a person who uses militant methods in pursuit of an objective. The term is not associated with the military. In general usage, a militant person is a confrontational person who does not necessarily use violence. Militant can refer to individuals or groups displaying aggressive behavior or attitudes. Militant is sometimes used as a euphemism for terrorist or armed insurgent. Militant is often used within some religious circles to denote the continuous battle of Christians or the Christian Church in their struggle against sin. In particular, the Roman Catholic Church differentiates between church militant and church triumphant. Ellen G. White, one of the founders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, says, "Now the church is militant. Now we are confronted with a world in darkness, almost wholly given over to idolatry." Such religious meaning must not be confused with the word belligerent, used to describe extremist religious behaviors found in some who, based on their extreme religious beliefs or ideologies, take up weapons and become involved in warfare, or who commit acts of violence or terrorism in an attempt to advance their extremist religious agendas. Such extremist groups can be Christian, Muslims, Jewish, or of any other religious affiliation. Newspapers, magazines, and other information sources may deem militant a neutral term, whereas terrorist or guerrilla conventionally indicates disapproval of the behavior of the individual or organization so labeled. Regardless of the motivations for such behavior, militant, at other times, can refer to anyone not a member of formal armed forces engaging in warfare or serving as a combatant. The mass media sometimes uses the term militant in the context of terrorism. Journalists sometimes apply the term militant to paramilitary movements using terrorism as a tactic. The mass media also has used the term militant groups or radical militants for terrorist organizations. Those resisting a foreign military occupation can be seen as not meriting the label terrorists, because their acts of political violence against military targets of a foreign occupier do not violate international law. Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions gives lawful combatant status to those engaging in armed conflicts against alien occupation. Colonia